Hey, my name's Brent Hall with Lightbenders Visuals, and today I'm going to show you how to get smooth water shots with no filters. So a lot of times the best way to do this usually is with a filter, but there's two reasons why I don't have a filter today. One is maybe I forgot it, or maybe I'm packing light and don't want to carry it. The biggest reason though is I have a 14mm lens on here and it can't take filters. So this is how we're going to work around that. Because normally you would want a neutral density filter to really get the longest shutter speeds you can, because we want to slow all of this water down. So I'm going to show you how to do that without filters. So the first thing we need to do is figure out our settings. Since we don't have filters, the easiest way that we can do to slow things down is to change our aperture. So I'm going to lower my aperture to about as far as it can go, which is f22 on this lens. So I'm just going to lower it there. So we're at f22 now, and I'm in manual mode. Yeah, now I'm in manual mode. I'm at f22, and now we're just going to start playing with shutter speeds. And I've kind of found that about 1 second to 2 seconds is what I can get away with here. And we don't want to, if you notice, there's a lot of bubbles today. The water is very aerated, and when you slow that down, it's going to create a lot of white. So we don't want to overexpose that too much. Also back there where the clouds are is coming through. It's going to be very bright, so we don't want to overexpose that. So we just play, and I found that with this particular lighting setup, that I can get away with about 1 second to 2 seconds. So that's what I'm going to do. So there's a trick, and we're going to use Photoshop. We're going to use a blending mode to basically mimic a filter. But what we have to do first is we have to take a series of pictures, and if we know, we really want something more like 10 seconds or 30 seconds to really get this dramatic swirls in the water and the really silky smooth fall. And so we have to mimic that. We can only do about 1 second of shutters. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a series of shots at between 1 and 2 seconds, and we're basically going to add them together in Photoshop. So we're going to count, basically if I want a 10-second exposure, I'm going to shoot 10 1-second exposures. And I'm about 1.6 seconds, so maybe I'll shoot 6 or so. So we'll go ahead and do that, and you can see they're going to start showing up back here. One thing, if you'll notice, I'm on an extremely tiny tripod with a very heavy camera, which is not really recommended, although it is flat, so it's not going to fall over anything. But the smaller the tripod and the least sturdy your tripod is, the more camera shake is going to be introduced. So the ways you can combat that are you can get a remote trigger and plug it in, that way you're not touching the camera, which I don't have right now. Or you can use the self-timer on your camera. And there's typically, with most DSLRs, there's a self-timer mode in your drive mode, and you can switch that to either a 2-second or a 10-second with Canon, and it's very similar with other camera companies. So you want to make sure that's on. I've got it to a 2-second timer. That way when I touch the button and let it go, it counts down for 2 seconds until it takes a picture. That will alleviate a lot of the camera shake, hopefully. That way we'll get a nice focused and crisp shot. So I'm just going to keep doing this until we said, 6 or 7 shots. I mean, you could keep going with this all you want, because the blending mode that we're going to use in Photoshop is called the mean, and so it's just going to average the exposures all the exposures that you took into one. And if you did 100, then it's going to end up being a 100-second exposure. Obviously that's overkill, but we're going to, like I said, we're going to go with about 6 or 7 on that. It's almost done here. I think I'll just do one more maybe. So now that we have everything, you always want to double check and make sure you're in focus and all of that stuff. But we have everything now, and I'm just going to scroll through here, and it's looking really good. And I think I'm satisfied. So with that, now we have everything we need. We're gonna jump into Photoshop and I'm gonna show you some tricks, and you can do this with either Photoshop or Lightroom. I'm gonna do it with Photoshop, but we'll go from there and I'll see you in post-production. All right, so here we are, and I'm in Adobe Bridge right now. It's a companion with Photoshop, so if you have Photoshop, you have Bridge. And I'm going to be doing this in Bridge, but you can do this in Lightroom. It's going to work the same way. Lightroom is more integrated than Bridge and Photoshop, but this is how I have my stuff set up. So what I've done here is I've got the last 7 of my images highlighted, and I've decided those are the ones that I want to play with. So I'm just gonna, once I select them all, I'm just gonna double click on all of them, and it's gonna open up Camera Raw. And like I said, you can do this in Lightroom. Lightroom has all of these functions here of Camera Raw that's integrated into Lightroom, but you are gonna need Photoshop after that once we get all these basic stuff done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go ahead and start cleaning up my image, and I'll go ahead and fast forward this. Okay, so I've got this all how I want it pretty much, and for the basic tweaks, now what I'm going to do, instead of hitting open, I'm just going to go ahead, well first we're going to go over here and go to select all, so make sure all these select because we want to make this edit on all of them. So we're going to go to sync settings, and by default that's fine, just everything that I did is going to be in there, and hit OK, and if you notice now they're all the exact same edits that I just did to this first one. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit done, and that's going to open up my bridge again, and if you'll notice they're all still selected and they're all tweaked. This is not what I want, Photoshop. Okay, so now in here, now what we're going to do with all of them select, we're going to go up to Tools, we're going to go to Photoshop, and then we're going to go down to Load Files into Photoshop Layers. And this is going to take a minute. And what this is going to do is open up every one of those onto a separate layer in one new image. So once we get done with that, then we can start working with this. And what we're going to do is we're going to, this is the trick that I was telling you about earlier. We've got to turn this into a smart object. If we don't turn it into a smart object, it's not going to let us blend it the way we want. So what we do is we start here and we select all of them. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to right click and we're going to choose Convert to Smart Object. So what that's going to do is that's going to, basically it's going to merge them, but it's going to mash them all together into one layer that is a smart object. And basically when we put it into a smart object, we're telling it, hey, remember everything that you just did when you crushed it down. So don't forget that we have all of these layers here, and don't just merge it down. And Photoshop is going to remember that. That way we can do unique things to it that we can't do to normal layers. And this is taking quite a while because it's a very large, the more you do, I should say, remember I told you you can stack these infinitely, but the more you do, keep in mind you're going to have a more powerful computer because it's going to take up a lot of processing power to mash each one of those raw files into one. So now that they're done, what we're going to go is we're going to go up here to Layer and Smart Objects. And then we're going to go down here into Stack Mode. Now, there's a bunch of different stuff, but I remember I told you we want the one that's mean. So that's going to take all those layers that are still embedded within this smart object, and it's going to average them out. You see the difference there? And now it's much smoother. So now basically I have effectively I did 7 shots at 1.6 seconds, so that's 11-second shot.
basically. And I did that without a neutral density filter. And from here, now with your smart object, you're free to go in and clean up the image how you want. So the first thing I'm going to do, if you'll notice, I have a lot of dust on my sensor here, and you'll see all of these little things here, you see them all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean those up real quick, and I'm going to start by making a separate layer, and I'm going to hit Control Shift N, and that'll give me a new layer. You can also go up into here and layer and hit new, but it's Control Shift N, and I'm just going to name this something like Heal because I'm going to be using the Heal brush. So this is going to help clean it up. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab the spot healing brush, and I'm just going to go to town and clean all this sensor dust up real quick. Okay, and so once I'm done with that, then you can turn on and off, and you'll see in here and everything that you did. So you can always double check your work. So now I'm just going to play with a couple of more things, like some contrast. And here, I'll just bring this over so you can see it on the other screen. So I'm just going to do some kind of boost a little bit of this, highlights here, and drag some of those darker tones down just to give it a little bit more pop. But I think that's making my brights a little too bright. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush tool, I'm going to hit B for brush, and since I've got this mask on here in white, I'm going to paint with black, and that will tell it, everywhere I paint with black, that will tell it not to shine through. So I've got my opacity down and my flow down. Put my flow up to 100, and I'm going to put my opacity probably around 30 or so, 40, and I'm just going to paint in here and tell it not to make that layer adjustment in any of this spot. So yeah, so now you can see it's only around here that it's working. Like that. If you hit Control J, you'll duplicate the layer that you have selected. So now I have another layer on top of that that just doubles the effect. I don't know if I want it completely doubled though, so I'm just going to drop the opacity of that entire layer mask down a little bit, and that will soften it. So now we have a little bit of curves adjustment in there, and I'm thinking that's looking a lot better. Okay, one last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of make a vignette, and that's just going to help. Vignettes are good for, this is a really wide angle, and really we're only focused on kind of this area, although, you know, I like this stuff. So what I want to do is, there's a bunch of ways you can do this, and this is a really simple way. So I'm just going to grab new levels adjustment. I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to take the mid tones, and I'm just going to drop them. Okay, and this is global, so of course that looks like crap. And that's okay, because now what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control I, and that will invert the mask, and that will tell it, that will paint black over the whole mask. So now we're going to switch our brush, make sure we have B selected for brush, and then we're going to hit the X button, and that'll switch these two colors. You can pick any two colors you want on the brush for your quick select, and hitting X toggles between them. So now we want to paint with white, and we're going to tell it to, wherever we paint with white is going to reveal the layer mask that we just did. So again, I want about a medium opacity, and I'm just going to paint in a little bit of a vignette. And so you can see here in my layer mask how that looks, how I painted it, and there it is. So that is a little bit strong, I think, so I'm just going to back down the opacity a little bit. And again, you'll see there it is. It really helps kind of push your eyes into what's the central part of the image here. And it's not necessarily the center, but this is what we're focusing on. So there it is. There's my image from start to finish. You can see, you can go select all of these things and you'll see what they looked like before and after. And of course, you can keep going with this and do anything you want to it, but for sort of a very natural feel. And we did all of this beautiful, silky smooth waterfall shots with no filters. So yeah, if we come in here to bridge and come look at the difference now, so I've saved it as, oops, let me, I saved it as PSD, but let me save it as JPEG. Okay, so now I've got my JPEG saved and bridge. So here is my PSD file, or here's my JPEG file, and let's crank this up a little bit so you can see just the amount of difference. And here's one of the regular shots that was at 1.6, and then we come back down here and big difference in the smoothness of the water, because again we're seeing that we added them all together. So this is more of an 11-second exposure, and here's your 1.6. It's a lot smoother. So that's it from start to finish. Beautiful waterfalls, smooth silky water with no filters, and you can apply this to lots of different situations. It doesn't have to necessarily be a waterfall. It could be a beach or a lake or a river or water fountains, anything that's got the flowing. You can also do this with clouds, same thing. If you've got clouds you want to smooth out over a landscape, you know, some mountains or whatever, do the same thing. So I hope this helped you out. It's a great technique for when you're out and about, and it'll really open up your creativity and what you can pull off without having necessarily more gear. So if you like this video and you want to see more stuff like this, be sure to go ahead and give me a subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments or any ideas for something you want to learn that I can make for a future video, be sure to drop a line in the comment box below and like and share. Thanks.